All right, a few quick notes before we dive in. First, I'm going to ask a question. Everybody can hear me okay? Excellent. We have everyone muted on our end, so feel free to add your questions throughout the chat in the chat uh, icon feature on the bottom of your screen. There's also a react icon in the lower toolbar where you can send emojis during the talk. Go ahead and see if you can send one now. If you can locate that react icon, we'd love to see that you're here. Excellent. We will carve out time for a Q&A around 7:45, and we would love to hear from you. This conversation again is being recorded and will be shared with your organization's wellness contacts. My name is Dan Justis. I'm a wellness consultant with Smola Consulting. Smola is a benefits and wellness consulting firm serving the greater upstate New York region. We work with school districts, food services, manufacturing, nonprofits, and a variety of other businesses across the region. And our mission is simple. It's to help see your mission through. We're a high-touch firm that cares about our community and its people, to make sure you and your families understand and can access your benefits, and to create and help you find wellness programs that have the power to change your lives. This is the work that we love and are dedicated to at Smola. NatureRX explores how different relationships with nature, scientific, spiritual, agricultural, and athletic, can all lead to well-being, meaning, and reciprocity. NatureRX is built on the simple idea that time outdoors, when practiced with intention, duration, and depth, can support your physical and mental health, broaden your perspective, and deepen your connection with nature. And now to introduce our two esteemed guests. Dr. Darren Morton. Darren is an internationally recognized well-being researcher and director of the Lifestyle Medicine and Health Research Center at Avondale University. He's a fellow of the Australian Society of Lifestyle Medicine. Darren is the creator of something that you all may be familiar with, the LIFT Project, which is a well-being program that has reached tens of thousands of participants all over the globe. His research sits at the intersection of lifestyle medicine and positive psychology, exploring how our lifestyle shapes our feelings and behavior. For Darren, nature is not simply a research variable. It is a daily practice. He experiences it through sport and recreation, through his family life, and through the well-being research that shapes his work at Avondale. He joins us tonight not just as a scientist, but someone who immerses himself fully in what he studies, not as a passive observer, but as an active participant who knows what nature demands and what it can return. Lynne Staropoli Boucher. Lynne spent 18 years as Interfaith Chaplain and Director of the Center for Spirituality at Nazareth University, earning an invitation to speak at the White House and to present at the International Parliament of World Religions, Melbourne, Australia. She developed a nationally recognized yoga program at Nazareth and served as the president of the board of directors for the Yoga Service Council. Today, through Yoga Revolution, Lynne brings embodied, community-centered experiences to organizations, athletic teams, and youth across Rochester and beyond. Most of Lynne's life is lived outdoors. I mean that. Leading outdoor yoga experiences, paddleboard yoga, and a multitude of unique experience-based gatherings where mindfulness, connection, awe, and transcendence are not just taught, but felt. Lynne teaches from inside nature, and it pours out of her, the kind of bond with nature that can only be earned. And now, I want to acknowledge where many of you are in the NatureRX 2.0 journey. Week 1 invites us to remember our nature, to reconnect with the simple truth that humans are part of the natural world. Tonight's conversation is an extension of that remembering, explored through science, lived experience, and reflection. So we're not going to wait. We're not going to stand by. We're going to jump right into this fireside chat. And we're going to start at the beginning with how nature shaped us, maybe some of our first memories and first encounters. And I'll just kind of get us warmed up. People develop relationships with nature through many forms. For me, it was camping, waterhole swims with my father. This was very much adventure based, but admiration was certainly a part of it when I was young. When I recreate and reflect on these memories, they have matured. What started for me as excitement eventually became awe, which eventually became something closer to reciprocity. The sense that nature has given me something and I owed it some care in return. So, Darren and Lynne, we'd love to hear where it started for each of you and how that relationship has grown over time. And Lynne, I will invite you to kick us off tonight.
Sure thing. Thank you, Dan. It's been fascinating to reflect back on how I became the outdoor person that I am now. And it's not hard to trace it back to my childhood. My very early years, we lived a sort of typical suburban life. My dad was a very successful businessman in a company you might know called Pepsi Cola. And when I was about 8 years old, my parents just wanted a different life for myself and my siblings. I'm one of six kids in 8 years, so very tight group of siblings. And when I was eight, my parents moved us all out to the country. We moved for the localish people. We moved to Spencerport to a 16-acre farm with barns and animals and fields and woods and a pond. So most of my formative years from age 8 through about 16 were all out in the country. And we didn't have a TV. We were so mad at our parents for making this change at first. But as it turned out, we didn't need the things that we had before. We were so happy out in the country. And when I think to my childhood and the roots of my love of nature and the outdoors, it was just being outside with my siblings for those special years. And I think it's there that I realized like the world is endlessly entertaining and we could be curious and have so many adventures, and we didn't need TV, and we didn't need, well, there weren't even devices at the time. This was back in the 1970s. And we really just took all of the great outdoors to be our playground. And my siblings were our best friends. We didn't have a lot of neighbors. This is why I'm so close to my family now. And it's just, I think, why I fell in love with the great outdoors and have come around, especially later in my life, to being connected again to those early days. And one quick story, I remember one summer vacation, my parents decided we weren't going to go away. So we decided to vacation on our land. So we didn't go into the house for a week, and we just camped out and spent a whole summer vacation out on the pond and in the land, and just really helped me to realize there's just endless things to discover in the great outdoors. So those are my earliest formative years.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I can imagine a lot of people are relating to that, and that's resonating. What nature helped us, the connection to nature is developed early. And we'll talk about how that might be different today later on. But Darren, we would love to hear about your first encounters and how nature shaped you.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. It's so nice to be with you all. So thank you for the invitation. Yeah, I think I grew up in a rural community, and we had a little bit of property, and I just remember I'd get home, and I'm a little bit of an introvert, but I love just going. I used to call it out the back, and out the back of our place there was just there was just stuff to do, and there was something about just being out there, and I think. So innately, I think I was always drawn to that kind of space. I just knew that there was something profound about it. And then I think where it started to become more of a realization for me is during my university years, I would work as a lifeguard at some of the coastline beaches in Victoria. And I remember having, it'd be like a dedicated month each year over the summer period where you'd be working. And you'd be there all day and you'd watch the sun come up and then you'd watch the sun go down and the tide go out and then the tide come in. And there was something profoundly sinking, like and I remember just thinking, there's that truth, I think that the statement's been made, the closer you are to nature, the happier you are. And it was just really fond, happy memories for me. And it's interesting. Then, I used to do a lot of surfing, and my brother was very involved, and my dad would come with us. And I have some really fond memories of, driving down to the beach and going surfing. And in later years, even today, my brother and I, we surf together. We do different types of surfing, but we travel down the beach together, and I don't know. It's a beautiful thing. So yeah, I'm a water baby. I definitely love my wife sometimes says to me, "Yeah, I think that you need a dose of vitamin C," and she spells it SEA. Like vitamin C is for me. But obviously, I love mountains. I love, and to pick up on what you said, Dan, and that's I think is really insightful for me. I love being in nature, and I love how it makes me feel. But in more recent times, it's become more awe moments, more of that awe experience, particularly in big environments, and that reciprocity piece comes into play as well. So yeah, I love the great outdoors. There's a whole lot that's great about great outdoors.
Yeah, that is very cool. What I'm hearing really is, and I'm sure it's likely true for everyone, the best things for us when we were young were outside. And so that's something that we have to contend with this next generation. And frankly, I'm optimistic about it. I still think that the best things for us are outside, and that the conversation around let's do it, let's get out there and get after it, is something that's being had. I mean, tonight is a testament to that.
Mhm.
All right. So we're going to move on to the next question. We're going to get into the meat of it a little bit. Let's talk about nature as medicine, the title of our conversation tonight. When you think about nature as medicine, what does that phrase mean to you personally? And Darren, for you, certainly, what does that mean for you scientifically? And then just to add a layer to that, what do you wish people understood better about how nature works on the mind and the body? And whoever is feeling moved to go first, feel free to jump in.
You go for it, Lynn. I'm enjoying
Oh,
what you
I
have
was
to say.
handing it to you, Darren. Do you feel like going?
Oh, I'm happy to. Look, I
Great.
think it's interesting. We're hearing this phrasing lots. I mean, I come from an exercise background, and it was probably it's probably 20 years ago now that they started that phrasing of exercise as medicine. That was actually a national, well, actually a global campaign that was introduced, and now we talk about food as medicine and nature as medicine. I think it's just a natural, it was only a matter of time before that occurred. And I think what it's in recognition of is that exposure to nature is not just a good preventive thing to do, and a nice thing to do. It's actually curative. Like we now know that engaging with nature not only can help prevent a whole range of different conditions, both physical and psychological, but it's curative. When people engage in these spaces, it is a medicine. It's not just prevention; it's also treatment and cure as well. And so I love that phrasing. I think that the whole idea of nature as medicine, I think putting it to the forefront of people's minds, that this isn't like, we have traditional medicine and then there's this other stuff that's sort of, it's no. This is, can be in some regards equal footing or even more effective. So yeah, I think I really love the term. And my one reflection I would say, and maybe we have time to dive into this. There is so much we know, like I'm interested in the nitty-gritty. I'm interested in the science behind why is nature medicine and what we're discovering. And scientists have this tendency to try and isolate the particular variables. We do it with nutrition research all the time. This is one of my big problems with nutrition research is that it's not enough to know that blueberries are good for you. They want to know what's the individual little thing in blueberries, what's the particular nutrient or compound that actually does the good. And the truth is that there's not just one thing in blueberries, there's thousands of things. And it's the same, I think, with nature. And so, whilst I'm really interested in a lot of the science that's coming up that's showing, for example, things like exposure to natural light, right? That's incredibly important for our mental health. And that's one thing. And there's a tendency to lock in, well, let's see if we can artificially manufacture then. And and they're already doing this. You can actually buy bright light emitting devices that you sit there inside and eat your breakfast in front of. And look, it's clinically, it actually is helpful. But I think the big message is that there's so much more out there in nature that we don't even know many of the things that are doing us good. We know fresh air. Some of the research showing that the benefits of just being exposed to fresh air and indoor spaces have a lot higher levels of CO2 than outdoor spaces do. With the bacteria that we're exposed to, most bacteria is really good, and we live symbiotically with that. So, and even things like earthing, like actually having your shoes off and being in the ground, or gardening where you've got your hands in the dirt. There's a whole lot of really, really fascinating mechanisms that we're seeing come to the fore, which greatly interests me as a scientist. But I think my concern is we don't want to lose the big picture here, that there is something just really, really good. And well, not just something, there is a whole heap of things, a myriad of things, and they're all connecting and they're all sort of contributing to this overall experience that we can't manufacture, right? We are designed to be out there in the great blue and green. And no matter how clever we get, with these, I see virtual reality things and all the rest of it. And I go, wow, that's clever, but it's never going to replace. It's never going to be the same as being in the great outdoors.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Lynne, I would love to hear, from your perspective, nature as medicine. I imagine that's going to be a unique kind of line of thinking. And I'll ask this question again. If you could tell somebody or a group of people how nature works on the body and mind. And, when I think about it, what's so interesting about what Darren said is there's a whole heap of things, and we know it's good, and all of it is good. A lot of the way nature is impacting our physiology is through hormonal and biochemical changes happening on the molecular level. They're like the undercurrent, right? You can't really feel it working on your body like you can when you're getting your heart rate up during exercise. It's happening, and you don't realize that it's happening. So anyway, Lynne, I'll turn it over to you.
Sure, great. When you first asked this question, what came to mind was something I often think when I'm teaching paddleboard yoga. So we get everyone all settled out on Irondequoit Creek, not far from here, not far from many of you probably. And we get all settled out on our paddleboards, and I have people tune into all their senses and everything around us. And then the framing I give it is to think of our human nature and to try and imagine, like right now, a lot of us, our minds are busied with a lot of stress and a lot of details. But deeper than that, I try and even have people imagine, like before we were so stressed, before we were so anxious about a lot of things, we were more in touch, maybe even as kids, as we all just reference our childhood experiences with nature. Our human nature, like what if our human nature was to be peaceful and at ease? That is how we can be as humans. And just the way our lives have developed as adults and as society, things have become so complicated and stressful and a lot of anxiety. But when we're out in nature, I like to imagine we're invited back into our original sense of our human nature, to be connected, to be peaceful, to not be so anxious. And nature itself, when we have these experiences where we can really be attentive to what we see and hear and feel, especially our senses are so good to help us be attentive to what's in the moment. All of those experiences in nature help us to return to a sense of being much more peaceful. And I've loved, Dana, whenever you've referenced this whole experience of nature as medicine, you've talked about it both in terms of science, which Darren is so good at, sort of come more from a spiritual angle. And for me, spirituality, and some of you were there when I did a keynote about spirituality recently, The idea of spirituality is about connection. So when our bodies are ill or not well, everything is disconnected and disintegrated. Things are not connected. And nature so often helps us reconnect with our original natural selves, connect with our bodies and our minds and our hearts and our spirits. So instead of feeling like so often these days when we're stressed, we feel a little bit out of sync and we feel disintegrated. So for me, the healing aspect of nature is just reintegrating, reconnecting, and reminding us in our bodies and minds and hearts that we can be peaceful, that we can be connected, that we are part of something so much bigger than us. And that's hard to put, to study scientifically. But even a lot of the research has been great in recent years that people spending time in nature feel more peaceful, feel less stressed. And to me, that's a beautiful spiritual healing and many times helps with the medical healing too, that the body can heal on so many levels when we get back to where we started, which is out in nature where we belong.
Mm, mm. The two perspectives are amazing, and I'm going to try to bring them together. You guys are making me think about the 3-day effect. And so there's a lot of research on what happens when you spend prolonged periods of exposure and immersion in nature. A lot of the research is pointing to the 72-hour mark. So what happens is across those 3 days, your your analytical mind is getting a full rest. It's getting to kind of shut down and relax for a longer period than it typically is allowed. And then these other parts of your brain, these creative parts of your brains, these pattern recognitions, relationship elements of the brain are really active and really free to kind of wander and roam. So much of what we see in the research on the 3-day effect doesn't just point to this switching of how our brain is operating, but it's how we're connecting with each other. And the best way that I can illustrate how that happens is, imagine a camping trip that you've been on where you've spent a few days in the woods or 3 nights and 3 days with your family. These memories are crystallized. The things that you do together, whether it's cleaning up camp or setting up your tent or cooking food, these become like really shared, amazing experiences where when we do this at home, we don't think twice about it. You can go out to dinner with your friends, and it's likely you're going to forget many of those times. But if you have one camping trip immersed in nature, it's likely that those memories are going to last for a really long time. So I'm fascinated by the research on the 3-day effect, and I think it blends what Darren, you're talking about from a scientific perspective, and Lynne, what you're talking about from a spiritual perspective.
I really like that, Dan. Actually, I haven't read lots about the 3-day effect, and I'm going to take a deep dive after this. So that's really interesting to me. I think your comment about attention, we actually know that built environments, like you can actually do this with people in functional MRI machines, right? They have them, they're monitoring their brain activity, and then they put up in front of them, and then once again, this is on a screen, but a built environment, like an urban landscape. And you actually see regions of your brain associated with fight or flight light up. They literally do. And then you put natural landscapes in front of people and you see this calming, this dial down, which relates very much to what Lynne has spoken about. And what that does is, we know that you have limited attentional capacity. And when you actually have, a good chunk of your brain sort of in this alarm state, dealing with this, these things that are triggering it, you don't have as much to do other things. Whereas this is what we know when people get into these blue and green spaces, nature-rich environments, their attentional capacity. Now, it's not like your attention gets bigger. We all have sort of we can only focus on a certain amount of things, but those other things are not, we're not having to dedicate resources to those things that are involved in fight or flight. So yeah, I really like that, Dan. I think that whole idea of just, it broadens and builds our ability to actually focus on things that really matter and get creative. And I think creativity, that's another really important piece here, because I find, for example, And I think exercise is a great creative. I always like to give exercise a plug, but exercise in nature, that's my go-to. Like that's my savior in many ways. Like, and I'll go for a ride or run in nature, and I find it's intriguing to me if I have a whole lot of opportunities available, if I'm going for a run and there's a whole lot of directions I could take, it only dawned on me that this is happening at a subconscious level, but I'm naturally drawn to the ones that are the most blue and green. And anyway, it's during those times that I think clearly, and I actually come up with ideas. I'm not going to say good ideas because I'm not sure if I've ever come up with a good idea, but I definitely noticed that effect that you're speaking of there. So yeah, there's something incredibly powerful when our brains are meant to be in these spaces, and so it's not rocket science that it's they work well when we are.
Yeah, 99% of human history, right? Before the industrial and agricultural revolution, we lived in constant contact and need of nature, So when you find yourself out in nature and you're listening to the breeze through the trees, or you're seeing the fractals of light reflect off the brook or the stream,
Yeah.
we're meant to feel that in a powerful, connected way. So yeah, thank you for bringing that full circle, Darren.
If I can just add one line, Dana, because Darren, something you said about when you have a choice of different paths to take, you take the blue or the greenest one. I just realized recently that there's so many ways I could drive from here to the university or from here to downtown. I always choose the one with the best trees. Like I've just realized recently, I choose my path of where my car is driving, even when I have to be in the car. I want to be along the path where there's the most trees. And I only recently realized that that's why I choose it.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Unintentionally, we do it. There's
Yeah.
something we're drawn to it. Yeah.
So something, really quickly, we were driving north from the Corning area today, and there's all these foothills. There's these rolling kind of steep foothills driving through like the Corning Elmira area, and we're driving through a little corridor, and I look to my left and I see snow on the trees, snow on the ground, and then I look to my right and I see the water dripping down the shale. And so on one side, there was still snow. And on the other side, the snow was being melted by the sunlight. And I had this like moment, and this happens to me fairly often where it's all in a flash. And you recognize it. It's not something that just like passes you by. It allows you to pause for a minute. And what I would offer to anybody listening tonight and anybody who's participating in NatureRX is that immerse yourself in nature in a way that allows you to see the unordinary. In nature, it may be ordinary, but allow yourself to focus on perhaps something that you're not always focusing on. And, there's a gratitude element, there's an awe element to that. And then you train yourself. And over time, next thing you know, you're driving to where the best trees are, or you're noticing where one side of the foothill is still ice and the other one is water. And so then you start to have these moments without even asking for them. So in the spiritual sense, it's impacting our physiology. It's changing the hormones and the blood chemicals, but there's something even deeper to it. Okay. I love this trajectory that we're on, and I'm gonna keep us on it, and I'm gonna move to the conversation of all. So NatureRX talks about all. It's really a cornerstone of the program, not just as a feeling, but as a shift in perspective. It inspires all through both expansive landscapes and intimate hands-on experiences like gardening or learning where food comes from. We've talked about it a little bit, but I'd love to hear you guys kind of elaborate on what all means to you and what it looks like in your relationship to nature. And Lynn, I'm gonna tap you in to go first.
Sure. Yeah, I love that you've been focusing on the theme of awe. It's definitely been a very central, significant word and experience for me in the past, I would say the past 10 years when I've been more than ever attentive to my connection with nature. And for me, it is so much about something each of you said, the idea of attention. What are we paying attention to? And you mentioned something, one or both of you mentioned the idea of patterns. Just noticing patterns in nature is so often just gives a sense of like that wow, just realizing, seeing something, hearing something, noticing something that just brings almost an otherworldly sense of something that is special. And sometimes I realize sometimes awe is at very simple, mundane things. Like recently, I was up in Montreal and we were in a spa that was in the harbor and we were looking down at the water from a hot tub. It was pretty amazing. And we were just noticing the patterns in the water and the patterns, it was just the water rippling. It was nothing like extraordinary, really, but paying attention to the patterns in the water and how incredibly beautiful they were. They were dancing with the wind. It was such a simple thing in nature, just an ordinary ripple of the water, but it brought just a sense of wonder at just sort of the mystery of how beauty could come across in such a simple thing. So sometimes I think it's a very simple thing that brings awe. Other times it's a very special event or a special sighting or experience. And something just happened to me last week. I didn't even get to tell you about it yet, Dan, that I often take my meditation outdoors. We have a hot tub, and I often do my meditation in the hot tub at night. And I have come to practicing my breathing out there. Speaking of science and the body healing itself, James Nestor's book called Breath, I highly recommend. And that book helped me with my nighttime meditation, which is I do breathing in for 4 and out for 6. So last week I was in the tub just doing my ordinary breathing in for 4 and out for 6. And I heard an owl and was listening to the owl and doing my breathing. And then I realized that my breathing was in sync with the owl's making its movement. I had to look up and find out it's an eastern screech owl. So I got to look up and picture this little creature that's in the pine tree above our hot tub. And it was an unbelievable sense of awe. Like this was more of an extraordinary special time that just being amazed by how the rhythm of my breathing and the rhythm of the owl vocalizing were in sync with each other. Like I literally could count my breaths and know when we were going to come in together on the next count. So sometimes the awe is like an extraordinary kind of experience like that. Other times it's the rippling of water. Either way, for me, I often feel it quite visceral, like quite in my body. And I often utter the phrase wow, like just the sense of wow, like that was such something so beautiful or so moving or just helping me feel connected to nature. So for me, the awe comes in so many different forms, and it's so much about what I'm paying attention to. I love that you said, Dan, about just the habit of looking for the snow, looking for the droplets, the icicles, just noticing nature and noticing patterns that are lovely, beautiful, intriguing, surprising. All of that is very awe-inspiring to me.
Darren, right before you jump in, I know you're chomping at the bit over there.
Yeah.
I think about how these moments in the research, it talks about behavioral and emotional regulation. Like it allows you to govern yourself better. And I think it's because we have these humble, small, connected moments. And, the more of those that you have, the more behavioral, attentional, and emotional regulation that you develop. It's important in a mindful practice. It's important in a yoga practice, but you can get those same things from a nature connectedness practice.
Mm. And it's a really good point and insight. Yeah, we know that exposure to nature is actually associated with more pro-social behavior, right? And you think, well, what's going on there? And it's what you've alluded to. Like for me, awe, moments of awe is I have different types. There's almost like the wow, and then there's that subtle aspect of awe as well, that like your story, Dan, before. The wow moments for me when I can think of so many of them, and I love to think of them. I actually like to return to them in my their special moments. But Yeah, for example, even going to the Grand Canyon for the first time, right? And I've been there a couple of times. I've done the run down to the bottom and up. You stand on the edge of that, and it's just like you're overcome with the magnitude of it. When was the last time that you went outside at night time and looked up at the stars and really thought about what's going on there and the magnitude of this? And for me. I'm out surfing, and there's a couple of favorite spots that I have where there are big mountains near the ocean, and it's just big, and the grandeur of this, like you just you can't take it in. And Neil Armstrong has the quite famous quote where he said when they were coming back to Earth in the little container pretty much. And he said, I looked out that tiny window and he said, I could see the earth, this tiny blue pea. And he said, and I held up my thumb and closed one eye and I could blot the entire planet out with my thumb. And then he makes this statement. He says, but I didn't feel like a giant. He said, I felt very, very small. And these for me, I find these moments of awe, you realize that, hey, we're a tiny piece of the puzzle here. In the midst of something that is just we are part of something so much bigger than ourselves. And it's interesting paradox for me because whilst you feel quite small, it's actually deeply meaningful. And in fact, we know that when we look at, what brings people a sense of meaning, it's having those moments of awe where you do feel small, but you feel connected to something so much bigger than yourself. So yeah, I love those sort of big, oh wow, I'm just got to stand here and let my eyes adjust kind of thing. I love those little moments, but then you have those other more subtle things like that you described, Dan, where like my brother, I went away with my brother. He's got a PhD in marine biology, and oddly enough, we surfed together, all of our life. But I've never actually we went to this particular place, and we went for a walk at night time, and there were these little crabs, look like millions of these crabs all over the beach, running everywhere. And he's telling me about what they're doing and how they interact with on the side of the rocky. There was these particular types of shellfish, and they're doing this and that. And it's awe-inspiring. Like I didn't know this stuff. And I think to myself, wow, this is just the symbiotic nature of what's going on, and we're part of this. That's incredible. Like this is just, and then let alone talk about take a scoop of sand or dirt, and we've got billions of bacteria in there that are doing their thing, and that actually interacts with the trees, and it's awe-inspiring. It's awe-inspiring, and it does us good to reflect in that space. And I think that like Lynne said, being intentional about taking the moments to go and actually seeing it, like as compared to just hurriedly passing through it. Yeah, it's profoundly good for us.
Thank you both. So, what Darren talked about with Neil Armstrong is something every astronaut experiences coming back from outer orbit, and it's called the overview effect. And it's where the borders blur, and you see this fragile, as Carl Sagan called it, pale blue dot, where we are here serving each other and the earth rather than fighting each other to control it. So the overview effect, what's amazing about it is that it touches every astronaut who sees it from space. And one quick story, one of my favorite stories, and Jen knows this story well because I tell it every chance that I get. I find this just absolutely fascinating, and I'm totally drawn to giant sea turtles because of it. When a giant sea turtle is born and they rush to the water, they spend decades of their life traveling tens of thousands of miles through the ocean, deep, featureless, vast blue expanse. And when the female sea turtle comes back to hatch their eggs, they find the same beach that they were born on. They return to that same beach, and it's because they have magnetite crystals in their brain that senses the Earth's magnetic field, and they can find that unique magnetic signature of the sand where they were born on. and had only touched for moments as they tried to escape, the birds and the seagulls and whatever was trying to get them before they got into the ocean. I just think that, when I think about that,
Amazing.
I'm amazed. Okay, wow. We're just getting started, you guys. Who wants to stay here all night? I'm going to move on, and I'm going to go to connection to care and how reciprocity in nature emerges. And we'll end on this question. And I have some questions that are loaded and ready to go, bonus questions. If you have any questions, if you're feeling like you want to ask something, please go ahead and put it in the chat, and we'll prioritize those as we get closer to our end time here. So, my own relationship with nature has shifted over time. I find myself teaching my kids about stewardship, oddly enough, in ways that I couldn't have ever expected. And I'm going to pause just to tell a quick story about stewardship. It's really about saving lives, and you understand what I mean here in a second. My son was about 2.5, and it had just recently rained. It was the beginning of spring. So we went outside, and the sun was shining, and some of the rain was dry, but there were still droplets on the grass. And I'm towards the end of my driveway, and I look back, and I see my son stomping on earthworms on our driveway. He's just smashing them. The instinct to squish overcame him, and he's jumping on them like Mario on a turtle shell. And I'm like, oh my goodness, what do I do in this moment? Like, I don't want him just smashing out all these earthworms. And, I was thinking on my feet, and I went over and I said, you know what these are called? These are earthworms. So we need to make sure that they have a way to get back to it. This isn't going to work for them. And you could see like some of the earthworms were dried up and really struggling. So I pointed those out, and we started to build a path with like little twigs and sticks and mulch. And we brought over a cup of water, and we were kind of like trickling the water onto the earthworm and kind of nudging it along, touching it a little bit gently. And eventually it got back to the earth, and it started to burrow into the wet ground. And it's like he understood it, because he still does it. He'll be 5 this summer, and every springtime comes around and he's building roads for earthworms. And I'm proud of him. I'm proud of myself too, but that's like stewardship in a way that I just couldn't have anticipated. So NatureRX frames it this way: all invites connection, connection leads to care, and care becomes reciprocity. So Darren and Lynne, how do you see that playing out in real life? How do each of you see care emerging from connection with the natural world?
I'll be brief, so I don't mind jumping in. Yeah. Do you want to go first, Darren, or I can jump in for a moment?
You go for it.
Okay, great. I'll be briefer about this one. I love the word stewardship, and I'm so glad that you've been saying that, Dan. And I think for me, the other two words that come to mind are how awe leads into care, are gratitude and protection. And it just makes me think, when something moves us and we feel connected to it. I keep thinking about our time out. I teach yoga in the Pines at Cumming Nature Center, and getting to know those trees and being connected to them and just being awe-inspired by the circle of trees that we practice in. If you look up, there's a heart-shaped circle that the trees just naturally made a heart shape up in the sky. It's amazing. But getting to know those trees and feeling connected to them and paying attention to them just brings me such a sense of gratitude for them. And that gratitude sort of leads to protectiveness, that it inspires me to want to be aware of whether those trees and other trees that I've come to know and love are being protected. And for me, that helps me want to be more educated. The Finger Lakes Land Trust has been a really cool resource. And also, it makes me want to be more aware of how I spend my money and how I vote. That the way that I spend my money, both donations and whether I'm buying food as local as possible, or just being aware of where my food is coming from, and being aware of what any politicians that I might be voting for, what their take is on environmental issues. Like that's how I kind of move from a spiritual experience to like actually where am I buying my food and who am I voting for and what issues am I paying attention to. So it's kind of cool how it goes from something very spiritual and almost mystical to something very practical and even political.
Yeah, very cool. It runs the entire spectrum of how we see the world and how we decide we want to live in it. Darren?
Yeah, my experience, I've been very over for some time now, but I've taken a great interest in how Indigenous communities often interact with the land and how they approach life and a life we lived well. And in Australia, we have the Aboriginal communities and tribes and I came across a really interesting quote by one of their elders just recently, and it said, and this person said, "We don't own the land owns us." And I thought that's a really profound counterpoint to how often we approach things in the West. This whole idea that it's ours and we can utilize resources for our, exploit them for whatever in whatever way for our benefit and our purposes. And when I think about even this idea of us owning stuff, like when you look at the history of the world and the planet and nature, we are just this tiny little slither of we're here one moment, we're gone the next, and who are we? Like this is what I've been challenged with personally. Who are we to think that it owes us, or that we have the ability, the right just to exploit it for whatever way, that's helpful to us. And so I think for me, I realize it's not about even my positive environmental actions, caring for the environment. It's not like a benevolent act on my behalf, I don't think. I think this is, I'm the one that's receiving the benevolence. We are part of nature. Like I think you said at the start, Dan, we often think that, the end of my skin, this is where I finish and this is where nature begins. No, we are part of nature. Like we're all in this, together. And so I think that whole idea of we need to not see it as us and nature, right? This is us. We're all part of this, and we have to. If this is if nature's an extension of you, hopefully you look after yourself. Surely you'd then, by extension, now look after, the nature as well. So. Yeah, to be honest, I get very distressed with the world that we live in and the approach. And I think I'm actually working on a new book and an idea for a documentary at the moment called Enough and exploring what is enough, and I think that we're harming nature because we think that we need a whole lot more than we do. And I think that we actually could find if we dialed that down a bit, we might find that not only is nature happier, but we'd be a whole lot happier also.
Mm. Yeah, this conversation really is the essence of NatureRX. Certainly in the program, you're going to learn about exactly how much nature is good for well-being, what those kind of thresholds are. So much of what we talked about is really how I authored the program. So this feels so totally and completely connected to the program. I just had to pull up a Native American proverb, Darren, and you'll like this. It's similar to what you just shared. It doesn't tie back to a specific person, but it says, we don't inherit the earth from our ancestors. We borrow it from our children. So it puts it into perspective. What are we leaving the next generation, and how can we make our small little tiny footprint and impact, and how we behave and what the next generation is watching, so that we can all continue to be good stewards. So I'm going to kind of pivot, and I'm going to ask some, simpler questions. I want people to have some really practical takeaways. I want them to be inspired, but Here's a question for both of you. How can people with limited time or limited access still build meaningful relationships with nature?
I'd be happy to go. I love this question, especially I just love the idea of habits, especially daily habits, and so many people are tight for time. Many times when I feel bad sometimes when I talk about how much time I get to spend outdoors in nature. At this stage of my life, I've been able to build my life so that I can be outdoors a lot, but I know a lot of people don't have that much time. And one suggestion I have, or one invitation really, is in your transitions from house to car, from car to building, from building to building, when you are outdoors, because I think there are many times, even throughout a busy day, when we are stepping outside briefly. I'm all for eyes to the skies, peeking up at the skies to see what's going on there, or even to the trees or the plants as springtime comes, looking for the flowers. But it takes so little time. It's really more a habit of attention to notice when you're leaving your house or your car. Those especially are kind of transitional moments that have great potential of just pausing, peeking up at the sky or the trees or down at the flowers that are hopefully about to bloom around here, and just taking a moment, maybe a deep breath, to just feel, to just pay attention and notice that your attention is helping you connect to the world beneath you and around you and above us. Almost always nature has some, even if it's a simple, ordinary cloud formation or the grass or whatever simple thing it might be, to just try and get in the habit of taking those moments of transition as opportunities to enjoy nature, even briefly.
Beautiful.
I actually love that, Lynn. I actually think they're really good. And we know from a behavior change point of view, having triggers that actually initiate a behavior. So, I mean, that's a great idea. Like every time you get out of the car, eyes up. What'd you say? Eyes to the skies?
Yeah, eyes to
That,
the skies, yes.
yeah, I love that. I think that's really cool. And I think the other thing is you don't, well, I'm going to look at more about the 3 day effect as Dan's been explaining. We definitely know that, for example, in Japan, they do the practice of forest bathing, and that's where they actually just go and immerse themselves in this deeply sort of green space. Within 2 hours, you see increases in like natural killer T cells, like your immune functions dial up. And that remains elevated for about 7 days after an experience like that. So, that 2 hour solid chunk is really good. But when it comes to light, for example, we know that about 20 minutes of exposure to light outside is very good for your emotional well-being. And so that the numbers just keep coming down, doesn't it? And I think what it's pointing to is that any exposure to nature is a beautiful thing. And even to the point, particularly given the average adult today spends 94 to 96% of their time indoors. Okay, so if you can just have even just eat your lunch outdoors, or just these little whatever opportunity. I know that we live busy lives, or like Lynn's got, and I've got some too, but try and bring the outdoors indoors if you can, you can have plants and that. I went to a school just recently, and they had an outdoor classroom, which I love the idea. And in fact, I take at the university where I teach, I often will take my class outdoors because that means they can't be on a screen and they're in a, rich blue and green space. But what they'd done at this school is they'd created a little hedge of trees around, such that when you're in that outdoor classroom, you felt like you're in the middle of nowhere. And this is actually pretty easy to replicate even around our homes. You can have a little spot, just that little pocket that when you're there, it feels like you're in the middle of the forest. So yeah, I think that the science is still developing, but we definitely know that I even know this. If I'm been indoors for meetings for a while and then I step outside and take a breath, like Lynne just described, instantly you feel better. Like there's something about that where life gets poured back into you. So yeah, any opportunity I think is great. But I love Lynne's idea of those, have little triggers every time we get out of the car. I'm gonna try that. That's my homework task, Lynne.
Very nice. I'm loving these comments. People are talking about what they do school drop off. Anytime you can get outside and take a deep breath and look around, notice the sights, the smells, the sounds. I have my work office with an ocean scene. We even know that looking at nature, I mean, Darren described it in the MRI imaging, that can give you a brief reprieve from the hustle and bustle of life. I would invite anyone to share what their little hidden kind of secret to quickly connecting with nature. Maybe we can get a list growing before we sign off here in a few minutes. I'm just going to take a beat. Lynn, I'm thinking about, man, I should have had like the summer day or sleeping in the forest or when I'm among the trees with Mary Oliver.
I got you. I got you. We got it
Do
in Mary
you?
Oliver ready for my closer.
So I would say, please share, and then I'll just give the kind of, the business close of the night. But please, let's all have a brief little mindful moment as Lynn has already prepared without me even asking her a Mary Oliver quote or poem.
Beautiful. And if you don't know Mary Oliver yet, she's an amazing nature writer. We use her poems all the time when we're out in the pines doing the yoga. And I love that Darren said it's about 2 hours because that experience out in the pines when we do the yoga meditation, it ends up being about a 2 hour experience. So I'm glad to tell the people that research is there. We use so many different Mary Oliver poems. Dana mentioned When I Am Among the Trees is a great one. But one of my favorites I wanted to share tonight, and it's a very simple poem called Instructions for Living a Life. It's 3 simple lines. Pay attention. Be astonished. Tell about it. That's the whole instruction from Mary Oliver. So much of what we talked about tonight, of course, Dana, you can do the final closing, but the paying attention, we've all referenced so many times. There is beauty of nature all around us at all times if we pay attention. The be astonished, I loved, Dana, that she references awe even without saying so. Just let yourself be astonished by the simplest mundane parts of nature and the wow moments as well. And I love the tell about it, being able to share with somebody else. When you do step out of your car into the house, noticing the skies or the trees or the flowers, whoever you're going to see next, tell them, be able to share, and we can keep inspiring and reminding each other to get out there and let each other enjoy the nature.
Beautiful. Darren, do you have any final parting words before we say goodnight or good morning in your instance?
Yeah, good morning. It's still morning over here, but tomorrow. No, I was just reading the comments, and yeah, I think that's great. The whole idea of this old messy silver maple, and we can sometimes go, oh, this is a hassle. I need to do this or prove that or whatever it might be. But what a privilege, to actually be connecting with nature. It is a beautiful thing, and it does us well. The science consistently shows that faith traditions have been doing this for a long time. It's in the wisdom literature. So it's not surprising. It's been around a long time. We know that if whatever we've been experiencing for thousands of years, that's generally quite good for us. It's when we deviate from that, then things become inflammatory in our bodies. And we've been engaged with nature for millennia. So let's keep doing it.
Yeah, well said. Both Lynn and Darren, thank you for your closing bit. For those of you who are participating in NatureRX, I invite you to return to that practice with curiosity. The program asks nothing of you but to go outside for those intentional minutes, whether through daily time outdoors, deep immersion, or small acts of care and conservation. Nature remains available to us all. It is not something we need to conquer, or we don't need to be trying to get anywhere, but something rather to be in relationship with. So we're going to close for the night. Thank you, everyone, for spending this time with us. Thank you to Darren and Lynn for the generosity of your knowledge, your experience, your expertise, and your presence. And thank you for all being part of this shared exploration on connection to nature. And have a great night.
Bye.
Ciao.